Hi, and welcome to part one of the Exercise Science and Kinesiology lecture. Today we are going to be going over the upper body push muscles. We're going to be going over primary mechanics of the upper body, as well as the main muscle groups utilized in the push motion of the body. Keep in mind that we're not going to be touching on every single muscle that has to do with stabilization, but more focused on the primary movers of the upper body push mechanics. So let's go ahead and get started. As we talk about this, I'm going to keep the title up here on the screen for us. Now, the primary upper body consists of 5 major muscle groups when it comes to pushing with the upper body. When we think about push, we generally think about the bench press or a push-up, but this can also apply to the overhead press or anything where we are pushing us away from an object or an object away from us. So let's go ahead and dig into it. Primarily, we have the most muscle that we consider is the pectoralis major. Now, the pectoralis major is the largest muscle of the chest. And with this, you'll notice what we call striations. Striations is the muscle fibers, and that dictates the line of pull. For instance, with the pectoralis major or pec major, it connects to the sternocostal or the sternum, and it inserts up here at the glenohumeral or up here in the shoulder. Now, when we think of connection and insertion, we want to think about anchor points. So at the connection, this is the anchor. It does not move from the sternum, and that pectoralis major muscle is responsible for taking my shoulder and subsequently my elbow joint and moving it across the body in this plane of motion. Now, we can manipulate that into a bench press or a fly based on the elbow flexion that we provide to the exercise. But at the end of the day, the pectoralis only does one thing, and that's take the arm from out here to in here. As a secondary muscle group, we also have the pectoralis minor or pec minor. This connects up here at the top of the sternum as well as at the clavicle and inserts down into the same location. Now, with this insertion point, the pectoralis minor also assists with taking that arm of motion and bringing it across the body. You would see this in an incline bench press or an upper fly to help hit the upper pectoral of the body, giving us a much more rounded approach to our pec. The third muscle in this component is going to be the anterior deltoid. The anterior deltoid is assisting in raising the arm up when it comes to flexion. Think about raising your arm up to ask a question, or in the gym, something like an overhead press would be a great example of the anterior deltoid getting work. The fourth one is going to be, if I can find my marker, the lateral deltoid. So the lateral head of the deltoid assists in lateral flexion, this way, away from the body. This is responsible for your lateral raise in the gym that you see so often, exercise such as this. We'll talk about form and function on how you can most effectively hit that after we're done talking about the primary muscle groups. The fifth muscle that ties all of this in is a 3-headed muscle called the tricep. Now, the tricep is responsible for elbow flexion. So when we look at the tricep and we look at how it is designed, more specifically in an anatomical model, as this is just an example, it has 3 heads that all help with assisting the elbow go from a bent position where the bicep would be involved to a completely flexed position. This is what creates the dynamic between a fly and a bench press. And it can also be a limiting factor depending on if your triceps or your chest are stronger than the other. You may notice this come to play when you're trying to exceed a bench press where you're really at the edge, you're at a 9-level RPE, which we'll discuss a little bit more later, and you're having a hard time with the lockout. That could be the tricep involvement, and we need to work on those. But again, we will discuss all of that in a later video. For now, we're just looking at the primary movers of the upper body, that being the pectoralis major, pectoralis minor, anterior and lateral deltoid, as well as the tricep. With all of these in mind, it's important to think about how we activate these during our workout. So if we are doing a typical split, which would be called a bro split or a push-pull leg split, we would be looking at using chest and triceps together in the same workout. Now, with all of these different muscles being incorporated, how do we know when we're getting the right muscle recruitment for the right exercise? This is where the 5x3 rule comes in. The 5x3 rule simply states that there are 5 degrees of elevation to the body: 180, 120, 90, 60, and 0. As well as 3 degrees of separation. Think about this as a head down. So from the top of the head looking down, we have a narrow grip, which would be a 1 position, a neutral grip or shoulder width grip at a 2 position, and a wide grip in this 3 position here. We'll start with the elevation. One of the easiest things that we can do to track elevation and what muscle group we want to be targeting is look towards the internal part of the elbow right here. So for example, if I'm at 180 degrees and I want to know what muscle group this is working because I'm unfamiliar with the gym or I'm not getting in the right spot and I just want to double check myself, I can look at the internal part of the elbow and draw a straight line to where it intersects with my torso. And that, if I draw that line straight down, would intersect here with the anterior deltoid. So we know that the 180 degree push mechanic is in the anterior deltoid, right here. As I drop that down into what would be an incline bench press, that'd be 120 degrees, and we can see it here. We can see that pec muscle activate as I draw in. But if I look at the internal elbow and I draw back to my torso, we can see how it aligns with the pec minor. An important note to think about here, and comes to our first cue, which is shoulders in pockets. Shoulders in pockets simply states that we want to take our shoulder blades back and down, like we're trying to stick them in our back pockets, in order to properly set the shoulder blade in a correct position to maintain weight. We can see this example play out as I go into this 120 degree angle. If my shoulder is not in the pocket and I'm pushed forward because I'm overly concerned with what's in my hand and not where my shoulder blade is, you'll notice that as I draw that degree down, I'm going to run into my shoulder well before I run into my chest. Knowing that gravity works in a downward angle, and that's why we create weight, then what we see is that shoulder is now going to take on all of that load, and that puts us in a very dangerous position and very high risk for injury. So what we want to do is make sure that shoulder is in its pocket. So we're going to set the shoulders back and down, re-drag into that 180 position, and we can notice that that pec major is now involved and the shoulder is tucked back away from the body, allowing me to make sure that my pectoralis minor is in perfect technique. And that allows for maximum load, maximum strength, and with the least amount of risk to injury. As we move that down into the 90 degree angle, you'll notice the same thing plays out. If my shoulder is overextended in the bench press or in a push-up, I'm going to be dragging into the shoulder. So I want to make sure the shoulder blades are down and back. And then when I go into that 90 degree position, you'll notice that I intersect here with the pectoralis major. Same thing applies down here at 60 degrees with the pectoralis major, but the lower half of that muscle. So we're going to draw up those examples as we just went through them. And we have the 120 degree here in the pec minor, as well as 90 degrees in pec major and 60 degrees in pec major. The only part where this slightly deviates is at the 0 degree. So if my elbows are by their side and shoulders are down, it's very hard to do any kind of pushing from this position. So there's not a lot that we can do here except for the tricep extension. And that can be with a palms down approach or a supinated palms up approach, where we're extending the tricep and flexing to bring those arms down. So that will give us our 0 degree position being the tricep. You'll notice that we still missed the lateral part of the shoulder here. And this is where we bring in the width or the separation part of the 5x3 rule. So with the separation, what we're looking at, again, 1 would be close grip, 2 neutral grip, 3 wide grip. Before we break down how that applies to the body, what we do want to take a look at is the second cue you're going to be looking at, which is elbows. Elbows are key. That's cue number 2. Elbows are key is an excellent example of why it's important to focus here from the elbow back as opposed to the hand. When we think about the hand, a lot of times we get overly concerned with the barbell. Not to say that it's not important, but we get too focused on the implement we're holding, such as a barbell, and we start to over drag because we're over focused on that push. So we want to remove that and think of the hand more as a grip position factor more than it is an actual lifting standard. So we want to focus on here, the elbow. You'll see this flaw come up a lot, not only on the bench press, but on a pec fly. If I have a machine or on cables and I'm coming forward with a pec fly, a lot of times as we fatigue or the weight is too heavy and we've picked an inappropriate amount of weight, we will see the hands collide in this way. And you'll notice that the elbow has not generated any additional flexion towards the pec major or pec minor muscle. And this creates an ineffective workout. So we want to make sure that when we are looking at the elbow and the hand, that this maintains proper form and that we're dragging it across the body this way. And then we bring it back out. We don't want that elbow to bend and create a false sense of contact here when the chest did not get activated properly. Again, this really applies to the pec fly. So now that we've addressed that elbows are key, and this is where the chest gets activated from the beginning of the video, we want to look at that ray. So 1 is really anywhere between 1 and 2. This can be a variable. 2 is anywhere between shoulder width and slightly out, and 3 is anywhere out of shoulder width and slightly even wider than that. So this is where the lateral raise comes in. So if we were to map this on the body, we would see that 1 affects very close to the sternum. So we'll put a 1 right here. And remember, this can apply at any point. It depends on the elevation that you choose. But for now, because we have space here, I'll use the 1 here. As we drag this out to a 2 position, we will see that the 2 affects a little bit more middle chest, but still getting good contraction, just not as much as if we were to drag it over. And then 3 is going to be out here. But you'll notice that a very wide bench press would be inefficient for a proper range of motion. So we're going to utilize this 3 mentality of this wide grip to focus on the lateral head of the deltoid. So if we grabbed a weight and we were to push it upward in this style position with our shoulder blades down and making sure that our back isn't getting involved with the trapezius muscle, which we'll go about in the next video, that is what hits the lateral head of the deltoid. So now that we have all of that broken down, we have our degrees of elevation, 0 coming up and around to 180, as well as the 3 degrees of separation, 1, 2, and 3. With this approach, you will be able to understand any movement as far as an upper body push goes, where you're supposed to feel the muscle mechanics hitting and where the muscle connection should be, as opposed to where it may not be. As an example, we may look at an incline bench press. So with the incline bench press, we know that, let's use a little bench here. If we're sitting at an incline bench press here, and we have our arms here, that we're somewhere between 180 and 120, giving us a range of maybe 160 degrees of elevation. at 160 degrees, we should be roughly in the pec minor. However, for some people, you may notice that you hit too much shoulder blade activity, or not shoulder blade, anterior deltoid activity in this angle. So it would be smart of us to drop the position of this bench back to increase that degree a little closer to that 120 to give us a more adequate upper pec exercise than a shoulder exercise. So with that being said, make sure that you're following your 2 cues, shoulders in pockets and keeping track of your elbows, because they're the key to the entire exercise. In the next video, we're going to take this same methodology and apply it to the upper body pull muscles. So stay tuned and enjoy.